this is my first video on this channel, and I hope that you are just as excited as I am. I hope the audio levels are okay. I had to cover my microphone with a sock so that it isn't too plosive-y. I don't know if you know that word, but it's basically like if things are like popping into your microphone. It usually happens when it's like a B or a P, and it just really distorts the audio. And as someone who works in audio production, it would be sacrilegious of me to make an audio piece that is poor quality, but we shall give this a go. But I wanted to coincide this audio with me getting back into reading, because I used to love reading when I was in my late teens. My favourite books were A Little in Love by Susan Fletcher, I think that's the name of the artist. The Bees by Lalaine Paul, I loved that book. And also, this is one I studied for my GCSEs, but it was Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. Not Thomas Hardy. Was it Thomas Hardy? Oh god, my memory is I'm aiming to do as little editing on this as possible. I keep thinking of the actor who's in Venom. I was right, it is Thomas Hardy. I thought I was going mad. But basically, I loved reading when I was in my late teens. But I don't know if anyone who's gone to university or college, but I find when you get to that stage, you kind of become a bit of a bad reader, and not in a sense of like you can't read, but more in the sense of you are taught to scan and scan and scan for keywords and to make notes and searching for an excerpt to put in your essay, and you're not actually like sitting down and reading and enjoying the book. So when it got to that point in my life when I was reading for academic purposes, I found that I just couldn't properly read like a non-academic book, which was really sad because on paper I really enjoy pardon the pun, on paper I really enjoy reading, but it was just my reading habits just got really out of whack. But recently, I and my sisters and my mum started a book club, and we meet every 3 weeks to read half a book. We always finish the books. It's not like we read half a book and then move on to another book to read. And it slowly, and before that as well, but I've slowly got back into enjoying books properly. And I thought I could coincide my newfound love for reading again. Newfound love? I feel like that doesn't really apply here. But anyway, I wanted to open up the conversation and talk about books again. I used to have a booktube channel which I sort of converted into something else and then became my professional work thing. But no, I'm going to make this an ASMR channel because I really love ASMR. I find it so peaceful and comforting. I'm actually listening to a book about ASMR right now by Whispers Red, which I'll probably do a video about that soon. I'm only 20% of that in at the moment. But yeah, on to actually the first book that we read. So the first book we read was Sweet, 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 Little, 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 Little Lies, Sweet Little Lies, Sweet Little Lies, Sweet Little Lies, by Caz Frear. Caz Frear. It is part of a series in the Cat Kinsella universe. Cat Kinsella, who's the name of the protagonist of the series. I'll start by reading the blurb on Goodreads. I hope you're comfortable, by the way, whilst I set up. I hope you're having a nice cup of tea or, have a nice little blanket with you. I hope so, anyway. So it is a little bit of a lengthy one, so bear with me. In this gripping debut procedural, a young London policewoman must probe dark secrets buried deep in her own family's past to resolve a murder and a long-ago disappearance. 26-year-old Kat Kinsella overcame a troubled childhood to become a detective constable with the Metropolitan Police Force. But she's never been able to banish these ghosts. When she's called to the scene of a murder in Islington, not far from the pub her estranged father still runs, she discovers that Alice LePaine, a young housewife who didn't get out much, has been found strangled. Yeah, sorry, it's a murder mystery. It's a bit grim. Kat and her team immediately suspect Alice's husband until she receives a mysterious phone call that links the victim to Mary Ann Doyle, a teenage girl who went missing in Ireland 18 years earlier. The call raises uneasy memories for Kat. Her family met Marianne while on holiday, right before she vanished. Though she was only a child, Kat knew that her charming but dissolute father wasn't telling the truth when he denied knowing anything about Marianne or her disappearance. Did her father do something to the teenage girl all those years ago? Could he have harmed Alice now? And how can you trust a liar, even if he might be telling the truth? Determined to close the two cases, Kat rushes headlong into the investigation, crossing ethical lines and trampling professional codes. But in looking into the past, she might not like what she finds. So in my opinion, I feel like with the whole Mary Ann Doyle stuff, I feel like that could have been a good twist. You could have left, you could have omitted from the blurb. I feel like that would have been a bit more of a punchy impact, but I feel like if it's in the blurb, it's not a spoiler. So make that what you will. I pretty much agreed with my sisters and my mum in that I wasn't very entertained by this book, and that's for a number of reasons. The general prose of the book, I find it's a bit more like a glorified screenplay. I sort of thought about, those BBC One or ITV dramas, or if anyone who's not from the UK, like sort of those bog standard detective mysteries or kitchen sink dramas, and people might talk about it at the water cooler in the office for about a month, and then after 6 months, everybody forgets about it, and everyone's like, oh yeah, that series, I guess, and it's not really talked about afterwards, after the hype goes. It sort of reminded me of that. It doesn't help that the way it's written and with the prose, because it's spoken in from the protagonist's perspective, and I did not like the main character, and not necessarily when writing a story you have to have a pure, good, likeable character. I think there are so many examples of an unlikable character that you still like, but I don't think that was the case for Kat Kinsella, because the thing is, she is very cynical and very abrasive. She's like that a lot of the time, to the point where it gets a little exhausting hearing her interactions or her observations on people. And I just found that it just became a bit of a drudge to try and get through. The actual story itself, the murder mystery of it all, I always like finding out what happens in a murder mystery. I grew up on the Agatha Christie's, the Hercule Poirot. Are there any more examples? But those are the big ones I had growing up, and with my sister and my mum as well. Like, we love a good murder mystery, and that's why we picked this book as our first book, because, you know, we love a good murder mystery. And because it says that Cat, because her family is closely linked to the drama, you know, she crosses ethical lines and all that stuff. Cat Kinsella is a really bad detective. I feel like, as a normal person, if I was in her position, no matter how curious I am, or really nosy, or I feel like I have this justified right to find out what's going on, I would know, if I've gone through the whole process to be trained to be a police officer, to be a detective, I would not be involved in an investigation that would concern myself and or my family as part of the investigation. It gets to one point, I won't say what it is in particular, because that is a bit of a spoiler, but she makes this choice and continues making that same choice, which really got on my nerves. We were all just like, what is... She's such a bad detective. Like, why do you keep making these poor choices? Another thing that I found quite annoying was that, because it's the first in a series, right? And it felt like Caz Frear was holding back on what details to give, because it felt like she would be teetering on new information. But if it wasn't related, or if it wasn't, you know, really relevant, she would hold back. But I feel like for world building, that sort of stuff is really important. And it's written as if it kind of knows there's going to be more books in the future, which for me I find a bit arrogant. I'm not saying Caz Frear is an arrogant person, but I just feel like there's a little bit of overconfidence there about, like, oh, well, I know I'm going to be writing more books in the future that will get published because the first book will do so well, and I'm going to, you know, hold out on Cat Kinsella's life. But for me, I feel like those sort of things are really important in terms of getting to know someone as a well-rounded character, and not just anything that concerns the specific investigation. Like, the details about her brother, for example, you kind of get a vibe that he's a little weird, but you don't really get a lot of information about him. And for me, I feel like that would really help round out the dynamic in the family, Cat Kinsella's family, if we got to know everyone equally, whether it's relevant to the case or not. Speaking of, you know, dynamics, I find it interesting. I mean, I don't know the gender identity of Caz Frear. I don't know. I am assuming a feminine gender identity. But I find it really odd that the male characters had a little bit more bend to them, in terms of this sort of an archetype, but there's a lot of flexibility in there, and chance for well-roundedness as characters. But the female characters absolutely were just not real people. The big example I give is Cat Kinsella's boss. I've forgotten her name. That's the thing. A lot of this isn't very memorable. But this, you know, head of the Metropolitan Police, you know, she wears high heels around work all day. She's ordering people about at daily briefings. She's wearing red lipstick, and it's sort of like, who? You can't say no one would ever do that, because I always feel like there's always someone in the planet that would wear high heels at work at a police office all day with red lipstick and order people about. I feel like there's always going to be at least one person. But I just felt like you're going into details about this person that really doesn't appeal, or like it doesn't, I don't feel, I guess, you know, I'm going on to the whole relevance point, but it felt like more of a caricature. Because also one of the other suspects, Gina, She's sort of like the disappointed housewife, that kind of archetype. But as I said earlier, there's a lot less bend to these female characters. They sort of are very rigid in the archetype, and there isn't a lot of flexibility to explore their dynamic with Kat, the main character. And that kind of applies to Kat as well. I feel like there's an aim for quote-unquote relatability. One of my drama teachers used to tell me there's no such thing as having something that's relatable, because, like, relatable to whom? But I feel like, especially in recent media, there's a goal to be quote-unquote relatable by being standoffish and, you know, being cynical, as I said earlier. Sort of saying the stuff that the average person wouldn't normally say. And so when Kat Kinsella's, like, being sassy, you're like, oh god, yeah, good for her. But for me, like, it just was off-putting, and I didn't really like her as a character. I think the one last point I wanted to make about it is sort of like the timeline of things. So the book flits back between modern day, which is sort of around 2015, and then flits between that and the 1990s, when, you know, they're in Ireland and the Mary Ann Doyle stuff is happening. I think I was hindered by listening to the audiobook, and also because I feel like the audiobook reader I didn't particularly like, because it felt like her changes for people's voices were just sort of accent related and not a lot to do with pitch. And for the men, there was just the kind of like gruffness there, but there was not a lot of variety to it. But it didn't help listening to the audiobook version, because it's sort of a bit of a whiplash every time. And also, I know for me and my sisters and my mum, we were all like trying to configure what the timeline was between, like, the Mary Ann Doyle stuff. Like, how long were they in Ireland for? Like, what is happening? And then going to modern day, and, like, because Kat Kinsella goes back to Ireland at some point, and we don't know how long for. It's just a little bit confusing. And again, it feels like it would really improve it if it had, like, a visual medium rather than a verbal one, of, like, getting that, you know, BBC adaptation, you know. But that's not what we've got yet. We might have one, but who knows? I certainly won't be watching it. So I know a lot when people do criticisms of, like, art and stuff, like the star rating system is a bit reductive. But all I did, like, when I went on Goodreads, I went to the sentence that represented each star that most aligned with my experience with it. And I gave it 2 stars, which I know, like, for the first video is a little bit harsh, but it is just how I felt like I experienced with the book, and I wouldn't really recommend it. But I will say, in the next video, you know, things will drastically improve. But for the time being, that is it for today's video, for today's review. Feel free to leave your thoughts if you have read the book, if you're thinking about reading it, or if, even though I've said my thoughts, you want to read the book anyway, do let me know. And do like and subscribe would be really appreciated. And take care.